The blood on Natalie Edwards' hands had dried hours ago, but she could still feel its phantom warmth as she stumbled through the Colorado mountain pass in the fading light of October 1876. She had killed a man, and though he deserved it for what he tried to do to her, the law would not see it that way when they found his body in that mining camp outside Leadville. Her feet ached in boots meant for sitting in a wagon, not fleeing across rocky terrain. The temperature had dropped sharply as evening approached, and her thin traveling dress offered little protection against the mountain wind that cut through the pines. She had no food, no blanket, nothing but the small derringer still tucked in her pocket, and the terror that kept her moving forward even as exhaustion threatened to drop her where she stood. Natalie had been traveling with her uncle's freight company, making the journey from Denver to the mining settlements. She was 22 years old and had finally saved enough money working as a seamstress to start her own dress shop in one of the booming towns. But Frank Dawson, one of the freighters, had other plans. When the wagon train stopped for the night, he had cornered her away from the others, his intentions clear and violent. The derringer she had bought for protection had saved her life, but now she was a murderer in the eyes of the law. A woman's word against a dead man's reputation meant nothing, especially when that man had friends, so she ran. The path ahead grew darker with each passing moment. Natalie knew she should find shelter soon, but where? She had veered off the main trail hours ago, too afraid of being followed to stay on any road. The wilderness around her was vast and unforgiving, and she was hopelessly lost. A thin column of smoke caught her attention through the trees to her left. Her first instinct was to hide, but the temperature continued to drop, and she could see her breath now in small clouds before her face. Without shelter, she would not survive the night. Whoever lived out here might help her, or they might turn her in. She had to take the chance. Natalie pushed through the underbrush toward the smoke, her skirts catching on branches and thorns. Her hands were scratched and bleeding by the time she emerged into a small clearing where a solid log cabin stood against the mountainside. It was well built, with a stone chimney from which the smoke rose steadily. A small barn stood nearby, and she could hear a horse shifting inside. Someone definitely lived here. She approached the door on shaking legs, every instinct screaming at her to run back into the forest. But the cold was becoming unbearable, and she knew she had no choice. She raised her fist and knocked 3 times. The door opened almost immediately, and Natalie found herself staring up at the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. His dark hair hung past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin pants and a heavy wool shirt, and his brown eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back. "Please," she heard herself say, her voice cracking with exhaustion and cold. "I need help." He did not speak immediately, just looked past her into the darkening forest as if checking whether she was alone. When his gaze returned to her, it swept over her torn dress, her scratched hands, her face that must have shown every ounce of fear she felt. "You are hurt," he said finally. His voice was deep and rough, as if he did not use it often. "I am lost," Natalie said, which was true enough. "I need shelter for the night. I can work for it, or pay you when I reach the next town. Please, I will freeze out here." The mountain man studied her for another long moment, then stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in." The warmth that hit her as she entered was almost painful after the cold outside. The cabin was a single large room, neat and spare. A fire burned in the stone hearth, and a bed sat against the far wall. A table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and shelves along one wall held supplies and provisions. Animal pelts hung from the walls and ceiling beams, and the smell of wood smoke and leather filled the air. Natalie stood just inside the door, dripping and shaking, unsure what to do next. The mountain man closed the door behind her and moved past her to the fire. He picked up a heavy blanket from the bed and brought it to her. "You are cold," he said, draping it over her shoulders. "Sit by the fire." She did as he instructed, sinking into a chair near the hearth and pulling the blanket tight around herself. The warmth began to seep into her bones, but she could not stop shaking. The events of the day crashed over her all at once, and she fought back tears. The mountain man moved about the cabin with quiet efficiency. He ladled something from a pot hanging over the fire into a wooden bowl and brought it to her along with a spoon. "Eat," he said simply. The stew was simple but good, thick with meat and vegetables. Natalie had not realized how hungry she was until the first bite hit her stomach. She ate mechanically, barely tasting it, just needing the warmth and sustenance. He sat in the other chair and waited while she ate, not speaking, just watching the fire. When she finally set down the empty bowl, he looked at her again. "You are running from something," he said. It was not a question. Natalie's hands tightened on the blanket. "I cannot talk about it." He nodded slowly as if he had expected that answer. "You do not have to. But if someone is following you, I should know." "I do not think anyone followed me," she said quietly. "I was careful." "Good." He stood and moved to the shelves, pulling down some supplies. "The nights are cold this high up. You need dry clothes." He brought her a heavy wool shirt and a pair of buckskin pants. They would be far too large for her, but they were dry and warm. "You can change behind there," he said, gesturing to a corner partially blocked by hanging pelts. Natalie took the clothes gratefully and moved to the corner. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, still stiff from cold and fear. When she finally changed into his clothes, she had to roll the sleeves and pant legs multiple times, and she still felt like a child playing dress-up. But they were wonderfully warm, and for the first time in hours, she felt like she might actually survive. When she emerged, the mountain man had turned away, busy with something at the shelves. She cleared her throat and he glanced back at her. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes at the sight of her in his oversized clothes, but he said nothing about it. "Thank you," Natalie said. "For the food and the warmth, I am grateful." He nodded once. "You can call me Lucas," he said. "Lucas Foster." "Natalie," she replied. "Natalie Edwards." "Where were you heading, Natalie Edwards?" "Anywhere but where I was," she said honestly. "I just kept walking." Lucas studied her again with those intense brown eyes. "The next town is 2 days' walk from here. In your condition, maybe 3. The weather is turning. Could be snow before the week is out." Natalie's heart sank. She had no supplies, no proper clothes, and no idea which direction to go. "I will manage," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "You will not," Lucas said bluntly. "Not without proper gear. Not in these mountains." "Then what am I supposed to do?" The words came out sharper than she intended, born of exhaustion and fear. "You can stay here until you are ready to travel safely," Lucas said. "I will take you to the nearest town when the weather holds." Natalie wanted to refuse, to maintain some shred of independence, but she knew he was right. She would die out there alone. "I have a little money," she said. "Not much, but I can pay you something." "Keep your money," Lucas said. "You will need it when you reach town." "I have to pay you somehow," Natalie insisted. "I can cook or clean or mend clothes. I am a seamstress by trade." Lucas looked around his tidy cabin, then down at his worn but well-maintained clothing. "I manage fine on my own," he said. "But if it makes you feel better, you can help with the daily work." Relief flooded through her, even though she had essentially just agreed to stay with a complete stranger in the middle of nowhere. but Lucas Foster did not frighten her the way Frank Dawson had. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that felt protective rather than threatening. "Where will I sleep?" she asked, suddenly aware that there was only one bed in the cabin. Lucas glanced at the bed, then at the fire. "I usually sleep there," he said, gesturing to the bed. "But you can have it tonight. I will sleep by the fire." "No," Natalie said quickly. "I could not take your bed. Please let me sleep by the fire. You have already done so much." "You are exhausted and half frozen," Lucas said firmly. "You need proper rest. The bed is yours." "But where will you sleep?" "I have slept in worse places," Lucas said. He pulled another blanket from a chest and spread it on the floor near the door. "I will be fine here." Natalie wanted to protest again, but the exhaustion was catching up with her now that she was warm and fed. Her eyes felt heavy and every muscle in her body ached. "Just for tonight," she said. "Tomorrow I can sleep by the fire." Lucas did not argue, just gestured toward the bed. "Rest. You are safe here." Those 3 words broke something inside her. Natalie had not felt safe in so long, certainly not in the hours since she killed Frank Dawson, maybe not for longer than that. She moved to the bed and sat down on the edge, her hands twisting in the borrowed shirt. "Thank you," she whispered. Lucas nodded and turned to bank the fire for the night. Natalie lay down on the bed, pulling the heavy quilts over herself. The bed smelled like pine and wood smoke and leather, masculine and strangely comforting. She watched as Lucas settled onto his makeshift bed by the door, wrapping himself in the blanket. He was between her and the only exit, she realized. If anyone came through that door, they would have to go through him first. She closed her eyes and for the first time since she pulled the trigger on that Derringer, felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. She was not safe from the law, not safe from the consequences of what she had done. But for tonight, in this moment, she was safe enough. Natalie woke several times during the night, disoriented and afraid, but each time she heard Lucas's steady breathing near the door, and she was able to fall back asleep. When she finally woke for good, pale morning light was filtering through the cabin's small windows. The fire had been rebuilt and was crackling cheerfully, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Lucas was nowhere to be seen. She sat up slowly, her body stiff and sore from the previous day's ordeal. The cabin was warm, and she could hear movement outside. Natalie stood and moved to the window, looking out to see Lucas chopping wood near the tree line. He worked with the same quiet efficiency she had noticed the night before, his axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She turned back to the cabin and noticed that someone had folded her dried dress and placed it on the table along with her boots, which had been cleaned. The small kindness touched her more than she expected. She moved to the fire and found the coffee pot. Lucas had left a tin cup on the table, and she poured herself some coffee, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. The door opened, and Lucas entered carrying an armload of firewood. He glanced at her, nodded once in greeting, and moved to stack the wood near the hearth. "Good morning," Natalie said. "Morning," Lucas replied. He straightened and looked at her. "How do you feel?" "Better," she said honestly. "Sore, but better." "That is good." He moved to the shelves and began pulling down supplies for breakfast. "Can you cook?" "Yes," Natalie said, setting down her coffee. "Let me do that, please." Lucas hesitated, then stepped back and let her take over. She found flour and salt and lard and set about making biscuits while Lucas fried bacon in a heavy iron skillet. They worked in silence, moving around each other in the small space with surprising ease. When breakfast was ready, they sat at the table together. Natalie ate more slowly this morning, actually tasting the food. The biscuits had turned out well despite the unfamiliar hearth, and the bacon was crispy and good. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, breaking the silence. 5 years, Lucas said. I came up after the war. Natalie did not ask which side he had fought on. It did not matter now, and many men had come west to escape the memories of that terrible conflict. Do you trap? Lucas nodded. Beaver, fox, whatever I can find. I take the pelts down to Leadville twice a year to sell. Leadville, where Frank Dawson's body still lay where people would be looking for her. Natalie must have reacted visibly because Lucas's eyes sharpened. You know Leadville? He asked. I was near there, Natalie admitted carefully, before I got lost. Lucas studied her face for a long moment. Whatever happened, it is your business, he said finally. But if you are in trouble, real trouble, you should know what you are facing. Natalie set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. She wanted to tell him everything, to unburden herself to this steady, solid man who had shown her nothing but kindness. But what if he turned her in? What if he decided she was not worth the risk of harboring? I defended myself against a man who attacked me, she said quietly, choosing her words carefully. But I do not think the law will see it that way. Lucas's expression darkened. He hurt you, he tried to, Natalie said. I had a gun, I used it. Good, Lucas said flatly. Then you did what you had to do. The simple acceptance in his words made Natalie's throat tight. Most people would not see it that way, she said. Most people would say a woman should not have fought back. That I should have screamed for help or tried to reason with him or something other than what I did. Most people are fools, Lucas said. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes on her face. A man attacks you, you defend yourself. That is the law of survival, and it matters more than any law written in a book. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away. The law will not agree with you. The law is not here, Lucas said. You are, and you are welcome to stay as long as you need to decide what comes next. You do not even know me, Natalie said. Why would you help me? Lucas was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the fire. I know what it is like to run from something, he said finally. I know what it is like to need a place where you can catch your breath and figure out which way to go. If I can give you that, then that is what I will do. Natalie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Thank you, she said. I do not know what else to say except thank you. No need to say anything, Lucas said. He stood and began clearing the dishes. If you are staying a while, there is work to do. Can you handle a rifle? I have shot one a few times, Natalie said. I am not very good. I will teach you, Lucas said. If you are going to be out here, you need to know how to protect yourself from more than just men. There are bears and mountain lions in these woods. The thought of learning to shoot properly both frightened and intrigued Natalie. She nodded. All right. They spent the morning working around the cabin. Lucas showed her where he kept his supplies and how he organized everything for maximum efficiency. He had a root cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin where he stored vegetables and preserved meat. He had a small garden plot, empty now with winter coming, but clearly well tended during the growing season. You are very self-sufficient, Natalie observed as they checked the snares Lucas had set around the clearing. You have to be, living this far out, Lucas said. He reset a snare that had been disturbed by some animal. The nearest neighbor is 10 miles away. I might go weeks without seeing another person. Does it get lonely? Lucas glanced at her, then away. Sometimes, he admitted, but I prefer it to the alternative. What alternative? Living around people, Lucas said simply. After the war, I could not handle towns anymore. Too many people, too much noise. I needed somewhere quiet where I could think. Natalie understood that more than she might have a day ago. The idea of disappearing into the wilderness, of leaving behind all the complications and dangers of civilization, held a sudden appeal. It is beautiful here, she said, looking around at the mountains rising on all sides, The golden aspens mixed among the dark pines. "It is," Lucas agreed. "Harsh sometimes, but beautiful." They returned to the cabin, and Lucas brought out an older rifle from a locked chest. "This was my spare," he said. "I will teach you to use it properly." For the next hour, Natalie learned the basics of loading, aiming, and firing the rifle. Lucas was a patient teacher, showing her again and again how to hold the weapon properly, how to account for distance and wind, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. By the end of the lesson, she was hitting a tree trunk Lucas had marked about 30 yards away more often than not. "You learn fast," Lucas said with what might have been approval in his voice. "I am motivated," Natalie said. She was too. The rifle felt heavy in her hands but also empowering. She had relied on the small derringer out of desperation, but this was different. This was taking control. That afternoon, Lucas went out to check his trap lines, and Natalie stayed at the cabin to do the mending she had promised. She found his spare clothes and set to work repairing tiers and replacing buttons. It felt good to do something familiar, something that required concentration but not fear. She found herself thinking about Lucas Foster as she worked. He was different from any man she had known before. The men in her life had been either relatives or customers or, in Frank's case, threats. But Lucas was something else entirely. He was self-contained and quiet, speaking only when he had something to say. But he was not cold or distant. There was a warmth to him, hidden beneath the rough exterior, and he had not once made her feel threatened or uncomfortable. He had given up his bed without hesitation, had accepted her presence without demanding explanations, had offered to teach her to protect herself. Natalie could not remember the last time a man had done something for her without expecting something in return. Lucas returned in the late afternoon with 2 rabbits, which he skinned and prepared for dinner. Natalie made more biscuits and boiled some dried beans, and they ate together as the sun set beyond the mountains. "Tell me about your seamstress work," Lucas said as they ate. "How did you learn?" Natalie was surprised by the question. Most men showed no interest in women's work. "My mother taught me," she said. "She was a wonderful seamstress, could make anything. I worked with her until she died 3 years ago, then took over her customers in Denver." "Why did you leave Denver?" "I wanted to start my own shop," Natalie said. "In Denver, I was always competing with a dozen other seamstresses, and the women who could afford custom dresses already had their favorite. I thought in a mining town with all the new wealth, I might find customers who needed a good dressmaker." "That was smart," Lucas said. "Those mining towns are full of men getting rich who want their wives and daughters dressed in finery." "That was my thinking," Natalie said. "I had it all planned out. I saved for 2 years, bought passage with my uncle's freight company, and was going to set up shop in one of the Leadville satellite towns." Her voice fell. "But that did not work out." "Plans change," Lucas said. "You will find another way." His confidence in her was unexpected and touching. "I hope so," Natalie said. "I do not know what else I would do. Sewing is all I know." "You are learning to shoot now," Lucas pointed out, "and you can cook. You are tougher than you think." Natalie looked at him across the table, this mountain man who had saved her life and was now building up her confidence with quiet, matter-of-fact statements. "How do you know I am tough?" she asked. "You walked through these mountains alone, scared and freezing," Lucas said. "You survived." "That takes toughness, or desperation," Natalie said. "Sometimes they are the same thing," Lucas replied. He stood and began clearing the dishes. "You can have the bed again tonight." "No," Natalie said firmly. "Please, Lucas, I cannot keep taking your bed. Let me sleep by the fire tonight." "You need the rest," Lucas said. "So do you," Natalie countered. "You have been working all day. I will not be able to sleep knowing you are on the floor because of me." They stood facing each other in the small cabin, both stubborn. Finally, Lucas sighed. "We will trade off," he said. "Tonight you sleep in the bed. Tomorrow I will. Fair enough." It was not what Natalie wanted, but she could see she was not going to win this argument tonight. "Fair enough," she agreed reluctantly. That night, as she lay in Lucas's bed once again, Natalie found herself listening to his breathing near the door. She thought about how strange it was that she felt so comfortable here, so safe, when she barely knew this man. By all rights, she should be terrified, alone in the wilderness with a stranger. But Lucas had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, and some instinct deep inside her said she could trust him. She fell asleep thinking about the way his hands had moved so carefully when he showed her how to hold the rifle, the patience in his voice as he corrected her aim, the quiet pride when she finally hit the target. She fell asleep feeling, for the first time in a long time, like maybe things would be all right. The next few days fell into a comfortable routine. Natalie woke early and made breakfast while Lucas tended to his horse and checked the immediate area around the cabin. They ate together, talking more easily now, and then Lucas would work on his various tasks while Natalie handled the cooking and cleaning and mending. In the afternoons, Lucas gave her shooting lessons and she improved steadily. True to his word, they alternated sleeping in the bed. Natalie felt guilty about it, but had to admit she appreciated the comfort after long days of work and learning. And Lucas never complained, just rolled himself in a blanket by the door each night like it was no hardship at all. On the fourth day, Natalie woke to find snow falling outside the cabin windows. She stood by the glass, watching the white flakes drift down through the pines, and felt a strange mixture of peace and worry. The snow was beautiful, but it also meant she was trapped here for the time being. No one could track her through this weather, but she also could not leave. "First snow of the season," Lucas said from behind her. She had not heard him come in from the barn. "It will not stick long this time, but winter is coming." "How long until the pass is closed?" Natalie asked. "A month, maybe 6 weeks," Lucas said. "Why? Are you anxious to leave?" The question made Natalie pause. Was she? The honest answer was no. Here in this cabin she felt safer than she had in years. She did not have to watch her back or guard her words or fear what any man might do to her. She could just be. "I do not want to impose on you all winter," she said finally. "You are not imposing," Lucas said. He moved to stand beside her at the window. "The cabin is warmer with 2 people in it, the work goes faster, and it is nice to have someone to talk to." Natalie looked up at him. He was watching the snow fall, his expression thoughtful. In the days she had been here, she had learned that Lucas Foster was a man of few words but much depth. He noticed things, remembered things, cared about things more than he let on. "I like talking to you too," Natalie said softly. Lucas glanced down at her and something passed between them, some acknowledgement of the growing connection they both felt but neither had named. Then he looked away, clearing his throat. "We should get more firewood in before the snow gets heavier," he said. They spent the day preparing for the storm, bringing in extra wood and water, checking the barn to make sure Lucas's horse had everything needed. The snow fell steadily, and by evening there was a solid 3 inches on the ground. That night they sat by the fire after dinner and Lucas pulled out a harmonica. "Do you mind?" he asked. "Not at all," Natalie said. "Please play." The music that came from the small instrument was surprisingly beautiful. Lucas played old folk songs and melancholy ballads, songs that spoke of lost loves and distant homes and the ache of memory. Natalie sat and listened, her mending forgotten in her lap, transported by the music. When he finally stopped, she realized she had tears on her cheeks. "That was beautiful," she said, wiping her eyes. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My mother taught me," Lucas said, turning the harmonica over in his large hands. "Before the war, she said music was the only thing that could reach a person's soul when words failed." "She was right," Natalie said. "Will you play more?" Lucas played for another hour, and Natalie felt something shift inside her as she listened. This was more than gratitude, more than relief at being safe. This was the beginning of something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. The next morning, the snow had stopped, but winter had arrived in earnest. The temperature had dropped significantly, and ice formed in the water bucket overnight. Lucas showed Natalie how to break the ice and bank the fire properly to keep the cabin warm. "I need to go down to the lower trap lines today," Lucas said as they ate breakfast. "I should be back by late afternoon. Will you be all right here alone?" The question made Natalie nervous, but she nodded. She had the rifle and she knew how to use it now. "I will be fine," she said. "Be careful out there." Lucas left after breakfast, and Natalie spent the morning working around the cabin. She made bread, swept the floors, and organized the food stores. But her mind kept drifting to Lucas, out alone in the cold mountains. What if something happened to him? What if he did not come back? The worry surprised her with its intensity. When had she started caring so much about this quiet mountain man? When had his presence become so essential to her sense of safety and peace? The afternoon dragged on, and Natalie found herself going to the window every few minutes to look for him. The sun was setting when she finally saw his familiar figure emerging from the tree line, and relief flooded through her so powerfully it left her weak. She opened the door as he approached, and he looked up at her with something like surprise. "You were watching for me," he said. "I was worried," Natalie admitted. "It is getting late." Lucas studied her face for a long moment, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. He climbed the steps to the porch but stopped in front of her rather than going inside. "I am all right," he said quietly. "I know these mountains well. I would not take risks." "I know," Natalie said. "I just—" She trailed off, not sure how to explain the fear that had gripped her. "I was worried about you too," Lucas said. "All day, I kept thinking about what could happen. A bear coming down from the high country, or bandits passing through, or a dozen other things. I hurried back faster than I needed to." They stood looking at each other in the fading light, and Natalie felt the thing between them grow stronger, more undeniable. Lucas reached out slowly and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Natalie," he said, and her name in his deep voice did something to her insides. "Yes. I am glad you came to my door that night," Lucas said. "I am glad you stayed." "So am I," Natalie whispered. Lucas's hand cupped her cheek and she leaned into the touch without thinking. Then he stepped back, letting his hand fall. "We should get inside," he said. "It is cold." Natalie nodded, feeling both disappointed and relieved. Whatever was happening between them was moving fast, and part of her wanted to slow down to think it through. But another part of her wanted to throw caution aside and follow where her heart was leading. They ate dinner mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, full of unspoken understanding. When Natalie stood to clear the dishes, Lucas stood too and helped her, their hands brushing as they worked. Each touch felt electric, charged with possibility. It was Lucas's turn to sleep in the bed that night, but as Natalie spread her blanket by the fire, he said, "This is foolish." She looked up at him, confused. "What is this?" Lucas gestured to her makeshift bed, then to his proper one. "Trading off when the bed is big enough for two people who trust each other." Natalie's heart began to race. "Lucas." "I am not suggesting anything improper," Lucas said quickly. "But it is cold, and we are both grown people who have been dancing around what is happening between us. You can sleep on one side of the bed, and I will sleep on the other, and we will both be warmer and more comfortable than we have been." He was right, Natalie knew. They had been dancing around the growing attraction between them, both trying to be proper and respectful. But they were also isolated up here, alone in a way that made conventional propriety seem less important, and she trusted Lucas. That was the crucial thing. She trusted him completely. "All right," she said, "but you stay on your side." "I will," Lucas promised. He smiled slightly. "Unless you ask me not to." Natalie felt her face heat, but she smiled back. "We will see about that." They prepared for bed in careful silence, both aware of the significance of this shift in their relationship. When they finally lay down, one on each side of the bed with a good 6 inches between them, Natalie felt both nervous and exhilarated. "Good night, Natalie," Lucas said in the darkness. "Good night, Lucas." Natalie lay awake for a long time, acutely aware of the man beside her. She could hear his breathing, feel the warmth radiating from his body. She thought about reaching out to him, closing that careful distance between them, but she held back. Not yet. Whatever was growing between them needed time to develop properly. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of music and mountains and strong, gentle hands. Over the next week, the temperature continued to drop, and more snow fell. Lucas taught Natalie how to read the weather signs, how to predict when a storm was coming by the color of the sky and the behavior of the animals. He showed her how to preserve meat, how to tan hides, how to survive in the wilderness. And every night, they lay side by side in the bed, the distance between them shrinking gradually, naturally, until the night Natalie woke shivering from the cold and found herself pressed against Lucas's back without conscious thought. He was so warm and she was so cold, and it seemed like the most natural thing in the world to move closer to him. Lucas stirred and rolled over to face her. "You are freezing," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "I am sorry," Natalie said. "I did not mean to wake you." "Come here," Lucas said. He pulled her against his chest and wrapped his arms around her, sharing his warmth. "Better." "Much," Natalie said, her voice muffled against his shirt. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and smell the scent of him, wood smoke and pine and something uniquely his own. "Natalie," Lucas said after a moment, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I am falling in love with you," Lucas said simply. "I know it has only been a short time, but I cannot deny what I feel. You should know." Natalie pulled back just enough to see his face in the dim firelight that filtered through the cabin. His expression was serious, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I am falling in love with you too," she admitted. "I have been trying not to, trying to be sensible about it, but I cannot help it." "Why were you trying not to?" Lucas asked, his hand coming up to cup her face. "Because I am running from the law," Natalie said. "Because I have nothing to offer you. Because this is complicated and messy and probably a terrible idea." "I do not care about any of that," Lucas said. "I have spent 5 years alone on this mountain, telling myself I was content with solitude. Then you showed up at my door, scared and freezing and brave, and everything changed. I do not want to go back to being alone. I want you to stay." "For the winter?" Natalie asked, her heart pounding. "Forever," Lucas said. "Marry me, Natalie. Stay here with me. We will figure out the rest together." It was crazy, Natalie knew. They had known each other for barely 2 weeks. But she also knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that she had found something rare and precious with this man. She had found home. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Lucas kissed her then, and it was nothing like she had imagined a first kiss might be. It was not tentative or gentle. It was hungry and desperate and full of all the longing they had both been holding back. Natalie kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his long hair, her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I did not plan for that to happen tonight," he said. "I am glad it did." Natalie said. She kissed him again, softer this time, and he pulled her close and held her like she was something precious. They lay together in the darkness, talking quietly about the future. Lucas told her about his plans for the cabin, how he had always thought about building an addition but never had a reason to. Now he did. Natalie told him about her dream of sewing, and Lucas promised they would order fabric and supplies when the pass opened in the spring. "I need to tell you the whole truth about what happened in Leadville," Natalie said eventually. "You deserve to know exactly what I did." She told him everything. About Frank Dawson's attack, about the Derringer, about running away. Lucas listened without interrupting, his arms tight around her. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I am glad you killed him," Lucas said finally. "I am glad he did not hurt you, and I am glad you had the strength to fight back. And if the law comes looking for you, they will have to go through me." "I do not want you in trouble because of me," Natalie said. "Too late," Lucas said. "I am already planning to marry an outlaw. I am committed now." Despite everything, Natalie laughed. "Some outlaw. I am living in a cabin in the mountains with a mountain man." "Sounds like an outlaw to me," Lucas said. He kissed her temple. "We will be fine, Natalie. The law does not come up here often, and even if they do, they will not recognize you. You are not the same woman who ran away that night." He was right, Natalie realized. She was not the same woman. That woman had been scared and reactive, running blindly from danger. This woman was learning to shoot, learning to survive, learning to build a life on her own terms. She had found strength she did not know she possessed. "I love you," she said to Lucas. "I know it is fast, but I do. I love you." "I love you too," Lucas said. "Now go to sleep. We have work to do tomorrow." Natalie smiled and closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to drift off while wrapped in Lucas's arms. For the first time since she could remember, she felt completely, perfectly safe. The next morning they woke to find heavy snow falling again. Lucas judged it too dangerous to go far from the cabin, so they spent the day inside together. It felt different now, with their feelings spoken aloud, with the promise of marriage between them. They moved around each other with new awareness, finding excuses to touch, to be close. Lucas showed Natalie the pelts he had been saving, explaining which ones were valuable and which were just for practical use. Natalie showed Lucas some of her finer sewing work, and he was impressed by the detail and precision. "You could make clothing for the wealthy women in Denver with work like this," he said, examining a delicate embroidered collar. "That was the plan," Natalie said, "before everything changed." "The plan is not gone," Lucas said. "Just adjusted. You can still sew. Maybe not for wealthy women right away, but there are people in these mountains who need good, practical clothes. And when things settle down, when enough time has passed, maybe you can sell to the shops in Leadville again. Under a different name." The idea had not occurred to Natalie, but it made sense. "You think people would buy from me up here?" "I know they would," Lucas said. "Especially if I spread the word when I go down to trade. A good seamstress is valuable anywhere." Hope stirred in Natalie's chest, fragile but real. Maybe she could have her dream after all, just in a different form than she had imagined. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Lucas said, "We should get married soon, before winter really sets in." "How?" Natalie asked. "There is no preacher up here." "There is one in Silverton, about 15 miles south of here," Lucas said. "The trail is still passable if we go now before the next big storm. We could make it there and back in 3 days." The thought of leaving the safety of the cabin made Natalie nervous, but she also wanted to be married to Lucas properly, with vows spoken before God and witnesses. "Are you sure it is safe?" "As safe as it ever is," Lucas said. "I know the trail well, and I want you to be my wife, Natalie. Not just in our hearts, but in the eyes of the law and the church." His sincerity touched her deeply. "All right," she said. Let us go to Silverton." They left 2 days later after Lucas had carefully planned their route and packed supplies for the journey. Natalie wore her repaired dress and her own boots, though she kept Lucas's heavy coat and some of his warmer clothes underneath for the cold. Lucas rode his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Ranger, and Natalie rode behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. The journey was hard, with icy trails and bitter wind, but Lucas knew the way and kept them moving steadily. They stopped once to rest the horse and eat some of the food they had packed, and then pushed on as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. They reached Silverton just as full darkness fell. The town was small but bustling, full of miners and merchants and all the rough energy of a frontier settlement. Lucas found a modest boarding house run by a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson, who looked them over with sharp eyes before agreeing to rent them a room. "I assume you are married," she said pointedly. "We will be tomorrow morning," Lucas said. "Tonight we need 2 rooms." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly at his propriety. "Very well, 2 rooms. Breakfast is at 7. That night, lying alone in a narrow bed in the boarding house, Natalie felt strange without Lucas beside her. She had grown so accustomed to his presence, his warmth, the sound of his breathing. She could hear him moving around in the room next door and took comfort in knowing he was close. The next morning, they met with the circuit preacher, a kind man named Reverend Thompson, who asked them a few questions about their intentions and seemed satisfied with their answers. He agreed to marry them that afternoon in the small church at the edge of town. Natalie spent the morning shopping for a few necessities they would need back at the cabin, and Lucas arranged for some supplies to be held until he could come back with a pack mule to carry them. They moved through the town together, and Natalie felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She was really doing this. She was really going to marry this man she had known for less than a month. But when she looked at Lucas, solid and steady beside her, she felt no doubt. This was right. This was meant to be. The wedding was simple, with Mrs. Patterson and her husband serving as witnesses. Natalie wore her mended dress, and Lucas had cleaned up and trimmed his beard, looking almost civilized. They stood before Reverend Thompson in the small church, and Natalie felt tears in her eyes as they spoke their vows. "Do you, Lucas Foster, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Lucas said, his voice firm and clear, his eyes on Natalie's face. "And do you, Natalie Edwards, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Natalie said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado and the grace of God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Lucas, you may kiss your bride." Lucas pulled Natalie into his arms and kissed her tenderly, and she felt like her heart might burst with happiness. When they pulled apart, Mrs. Patterson was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and even her stern husband was smiling. They signed the marriage certificate, and Reverend Thompson gave them a copy to keep. "May God bless your union," he said warmly, "and may you have many happy years together." "Thank you," Natalie said, clutching the precious document. Proof that she was now Natalie Foster, wife of Lucas Foster, with all the legal protections and rights that came with marriage. She was no longer a lone woman fleeing from danger. She was part of something bigger, something stronger. That night, they stayed again at the boarding house, but this time in one room as husband and wife. Mrs. Patterson gave Natalie a knowing smile as she handed over the key, and Natalie felt her face heat with a mixture of embarrassment and anticipation. In the privacy of their room, Lucas pulled Natalie into his arms and held her close. "My wife," he said softly. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Natalie said. She looked up at him, this man who had saved her and sheltered her and now loved her. "I am so happy, Lucas." "So am I," Lucas said. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Natalie felt heat spread through her body. They had been careful up until now, respecting the boundaries of propriety even as they shared a bed. But they were married now, bound together legally and spiritually, and there was no need for restraint anymore. Lucas made love to her that night with the same careful attention he brought to everything else, learning what she liked, how she responded, taking his time despite his obvious desire. Natalie had been nervous, knowing only vague stories about what happened between husband and wife, but Lucas was gentle and patient. And by the time they finally came together completely, she was ready and eager. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Natalie felt a sense of wholeness she had never experienced before. She belonged to Lucas, and he belonged to her, and together they would build a life in the mountains. "I never thought I would be this happy," she whispered against his chest. "Neither did I," Lucas said, his hand stroking her hair. "I thought I was done with happiness after the war. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone on that mountain, and that would be enough. But then you came along and showed me there was more to life than just surviving." "You saved me," Natalie said. "In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Lucas corrected. "You gave me a reason to live again, Natalie. A reason to hope and plan and dream. That is a precious gift." They talked long into the night, making plans for their future. Lucas wanted to expand the cabin, build a proper workshop for Natalie's sewing. Natalie wanted to learn more about the wilderness, about trapping and hunting and surviving. They talked about children, both agreeing they wanted a family eventually, though they would wait a while to let their relationship solidify first. The next morning they set out for home. The word felt right in Natalie's mind. Home. Not the cabin exactly, but wherever she was with Lucas. That was home now. The journey back was easier, with clear weather and good spirits. They arrived at the cabin as the sun was setting, and Lucas lifted Natalie down from the horse and carried her over the threshold in the traditional way. She laughed and kissed him, feeling giddy with joy. That night, they made love again in their own bed, and it felt even better than it had in Silverton. This was their place, their sanctuary, and everything that happened here was part of building their life together. Winter settled in fully over the next few weeks. The snow piled high around the cabin, and the temperature dropped far below freezing. But inside, the cabin was warm and cozy, and Natalie had never been happier. She and Lucas fell into an easy routine, working together during the day and spending long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and making love. Lucas taught her to play the harmonica, though she was not nearly as good as he was. She taught him some of the finer points of cooking, and together they created meals that were simple but satisfying. They played cards and told stories and slowly revealed their pasts to each other. Natalie learned that Lucas had lost his entire family during the war. His parents and younger sister had died when their farm was burned, and he had come west to escape the memories. He had spent 2 years drifting before finally finding this mountain and building the cabin, creating a place where he could heal. Lucas learned that Natalie had been alone since her mother died, with no other family to speak of. Her father had disappeared when she was young, and she had supported herself through sewing ever since. She had always dreamed of having a real home, a real family, people who would not leave her. "You have that now," Lucas told her, holding her close. "I am not going anywhere. I am yours for the rest of my life." "And I am yours," Natalie said, "forever." As winter deepened, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, with missed monthly courses and morning sickness and a new fullness in her breasts. When she finally told Lucas, he looked stunned for a moment, then pulled her into a fierce embrace. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Natalie asked, suddenly worried. "I know we said we would wait." "I am thrilled," Lucas said. He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "This is wonderful news, Natalie, the best news." They spent that evening planning for the baby, talking about names and what changes they would need to make to the cabin. Lucas became even more protective, insisting Natalie rest more and take on less of the heavy work. She protested at first, but eventually gave in, secretly pleased by his concern. The winter months passed slowly, with Natalie growing rounder as the baby developed. Lucas became obsessed with providing for his new family, checking his trap lines religiously and bringing home game to add to their stores. He started working on the cabin addition whenever the weather allowed, determined to have more space before the baby arrived. Natalie sewed baby clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. She had never let herself imagine this life, had never dared to hope for such happiness. And now here she was, carrying the child of a man she loved deeply, safe and warm in a home they had built together. One evening in late February, as they sat by the fire, Natalie said, "I am not afraid anymore." Lucas looked at her questioningly. "Afraid of what?" "Of being found. Of the law coming after me," Natalie said. "When I first came here, I was terrified every day that someone would show up and take me away. But now I realize that even if they did, even if the worst happened, I would not regret any of this. You were worth the risk, Lucas. This life we have built is worth everything." "No one is going to take you away," Lucas said firmly. "But I understand what you mean. I am not afraid anymore either. Not of the future, not of the past coming back. I am just grateful for right now, for you and for the baby." Spring came slowly to the high mountains, with the snow melting gradually and green shoots beginning to appear. Natalie's belly had grown large, and she moved with the careful waddle of a woman in her final months of pregnancy. Lucas had finished the addition to the cabin, creating a separate room that would serve as both nursery and storage. He had also built a proper cradle, smooth and sturdy, that sat ready near their bed. In early April, Natalie went into labor. Lucas had ridden down to Silverton a month earlier to fetch a midwife, an experienced woman named Sarah Colton, who had agreed to stay with them for a few weeks around the baby's due date. Mrs. Colton took charge immediately when Natalie's pains began, sending Lucas out of the cabin to boil water and pace nervously. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Natalie had never experienced such pain, such exhaustion. But every time she thought she could not go on, she would think of Lucas waiting outside, of the baby she was bringing into the world, and she would find the strength to keep going. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the cabin windows, the baby was born. Mrs. Colton caught the infant and quickly cleared its airway, and the sound of a baby's cry filled the cabin. "You have a son," Mrs. Colton said, smiling broadly. "A healthy, strong boy." "A son," Natalie breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Can I hold him, Mrs.?" Colton cleaned the baby quickly and placed him in Natalie's arms. He was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair like his father's. Natalie held him carefully, overwhelmed by the wave of love that crashed over her. This was her son, her child. "Lucas," she called out. "Come meet your son." Lucas burst through the door, his face pale with worry. But when he saw Natalie sitting up, tired but smiling with the baby in her arms, his expression transformed. He crossed the cabin in 3 long strides and knelt beside the bed, his eyes on the infant. "He is beautiful," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. "Can I hold him?" Natalie carefully transferred the baby to Lucas's arms. The big mountain man held his tiny son with infinite gentleness, tears running down into his beard. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Welcome to the world. I am your father, and I promise I will always keep you safe." Watching them together, Natalie felt her heart might burst with happiness. This was her family, her husband and her son. Everything she had never dared to hope for made real and precious in hers. "What should we name him?" Lucas asked, looking up at her. They had discussed names during the winter, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at her son, Natalie knew. "Thomas," she said. "Thomas Foster, after my father's father, who was a good man according to my mother." "Thomas Foster," Lucas repeated, trying out the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome home." Mrs. Colton stayed for another week, helping Natalie recover and teaching her how to care for the infant. Thomas was a good baby, eating well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Lucas was a devoted father, constantly checking on his son and helping with all the tasks that came with a newborn. When Mrs. Colton finally left, accepting payment in the form of pelts and preserved meat, Natalie felt both nervous and excited about being alone with her new family. But she and Lucas quickly found their rhythm, working together to care for Thomas while maintaining their daily routines. As spring turned to summer, Thomas grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and surprisingly curious for one so young. Lucas loved to hold him and talk to him, pointing out birds and trees and clouds. Natalie would watch them together and feel such love it was almost painful. One evening in late June, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset, Thomas asleep in his cradle nearby, Lucas said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" Natalie asked, leaning against his shoulder. "About going down to Leadville in the fall when I take my pelts to trade," Lucas said. "I want to see if there is any word about what happened last year, if people are still looking for you." Natalie stiffened. She had almost forgotten about Frank Dawson and that terrible night, so wrapped up had she been in her new life. "Why bring that up now?" "Because I do not want you to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder," Lucas said. "If they are still looking, we need to know. If they are not, then you can truly be free of it." "What if they are looking?" Natalie asked. "What if they recognize you as my husband and come here?" "Then we will deal with it," Lucas said. "But I think enough time has passed. People forget. New crimes happen. And you are not the same woman anymore. You are Natalie Foster, wife and mother, living legally under your married name. No one is looking for a mountain man's wife." He was right, Natalie knew. She had changed so much in the past year that she barely recognized herself. The scared woman who had stumbled to Lucas's door was gone, replaced by someone stronger and more capable. "All right," she said, "but be careful, please." "Always," Lucas promised. When September came and it was time for Lucas to make his trading trip, Natalie felt the familiar fear rise up. But she tamped it down, trusting in her husband's judgment and ability. She kissed him goodbye at the cabin door, with Thomas in her arms, and watched him ride away with his pack horse loaded with pelts. The 4 days Lucas was gone were the longest of Natalie's life. She kept herself busy caring for Thomas and working around the cabin, but her mind constantly drifted to Lucas, wondering where he was and whether he was safe. When she finally saw him riding back up the trail on the 5th day, relief made her weak. Lucas dismounted and swept both her and Thomas into a hug. "I missed you," he said fiercely. "What did you find out?" Natalie asked when they were settled inside the cabin, Thomas playing on a blanket on the floor. "The law stopped looking for you months ago," Lucas said. "Frank Dawson had a reputation, apparently. After you disappeared, 3 other women came forward with stories of him attacking them. The marshal decided it was self-defense and closed the case. No one is looking for Natalie Edwards. Natalie felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest, one she had carried for so long she had forgotten it was there. "Really? I am free." "You are free," Lucas confirmed. "And I spread the word that my wife is an excellent seamstress who takes commissions. You already have 3 orders." He pulled out a list with names and requests. Natalie laughed, feeling giddy with relief and excitement. "I can actually work again, build my business." "You can do anything you want," Lucas said. "You are safe now, Natalie, truly safe." That night, after Thomas was asleep, they celebrated by making love with a passion that reminded Natalie of their first night together. She felt like she had been given a second chance at life, and she was determined to make the most of it. Over the next few years, Natalie's sewing business grew steadily. Word spread through the mountains about the talented seamstress who lived with the mountain man, and people began making the journey to commission work. Lucas built her a proper workshop in the cabin addition, with good light and storage for fabric and supplies. Natalie sewed everything from practical work clothes to fancy dresses, and her reputation grew. Lucas continued his trapping and hunting, but he also began guiding people through the mountains, using his extensive knowledge of the terrain to help miners and settlers find their way. Between his work and Natalie's, they were able to save money and make improvements to their property. Thomas grew into a bright, active boy who loved the wilderness as much as his father. By the time he was 3, he could identify animal tracks and knew the names of dozens of plants. He was a happy child, secure in the love of his parents and the beauty of his mountain home. When Thomas was 4, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was less nervous, more confident in her ability to handle childbirth. The baby, a daughter they named Rose, arrived in early spring with less difficulty than Thomas had. She had Natalie's lighter coloring and her father's steady temperament, and from the beginning, she was the darling of the family. Lucas was a wonderful father, patient and loving with both children. He taught Thomas to ride and shoot and survive in the wilderness, while also teaching him to read and write using the few books they had. Natalie taught both children sewing and cooking, determined that they grow up with practical skills no matter their gender. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The family grew vegetables in the summer and preserved food for winter. They made trips to Silverton and occasionally to Leadville, where Natalie was now known as one of the finest seamstresses in the territory. She reconnected with some of the merchants she had originally planned to work with, and they began carrying her work in their shops. When Thomas was 7 and Rose was 3, Lucas and Natalie had another son whom they named Daniel. He was a robust baby with a loud cry and an even louder laugh, and he completed their family perfectly. The cabin had been expanded several times by now, with separate bedrooms for the children and an enlarged workshop for Natalie. Lucas had also built a larger barn and added some chickens and a milk cow to their homestead. They were prosperous by mountain standards, comfortable and happy. One evening when Thomas was 10, Rose was 6, and Daniel was 3, the family sat around the dinner table in their warm, well-lit cabin. Lucas looked around at his wife and children, his face filled with contentment. "I have been thinking," he said, a phrase that always made Natalie smile. "What about?" she asked. "About how lucky I am," Lucas said simply. 10 years ago, I was alone on this mountain, convinced I would spend the rest of my life that way. Then you knocked on my door, scared and freezing, and everything changed. You gave me a family, Natalie. You gave me a life worth living." "You saved me first," Natalie reminded him, reaching across the table to take his hand. "In every way that mattered. "We saved each other," Lucas said, echoing the words he had spoken on their wedding night. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Thomas looked between his parents, curious. "How did you meet?" he asked. It was a story they had told before, but he never tired of hearing it. "Your mother came to my door in the middle of a cold night," Lucas said, smiling at the memory. "She was lost and afraid, and she begged to sleep by the fire. But Papa offered her his bed instead," Rose chimed in, knowing the story well. "He did," Natalie confirmed. "And he slept by the door to protect me, even though he did not know me at all. That is how I knew he was a good man. That is how I knew I could trust him." "And then you fell in love," Daniel said, his young voice confident. "We did," Lucas said. "We fell in love and we got married, and then we had you three. And now we have everything we could ever want." Natalie looked around at her family, at the home they had built together through hard work and love and determination. She thought about that terrified woman who had stumbled through the mountains 11 years ago, running from her past with no hope for the future. That woman could never have imagined this life, this happiness, this perfect sense of belonging. "I love you," she said to Lucas, the words simple but weighted with years of meaning. "I love you too," Lucas said. "Always." As the children chattered around them and the fire crackled in the hearth, Natalie felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had been given a second chance at life, and she had made the most of it. She had built a business, raised a family, and loved a good man with all her heart. The years continued to pass in the mountains of Colorado. Thomas grew into a capable young man who combined his father's wilderness skills with his mother's business sense. By the time he was 16, he was helping Lucas with the guiding business, and had started courting the daughter of a family who lived about 20 miles away. Rose developed her mother's talent for sewing and began taking on her own commissions at age 12, specializing in delicate embroidery that brought premium prices. Daniel, always the most adventurous of the three, talked constantly about becoming a surveyor and mapping the unexplored territories. Lucas and Natalie grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Lucas's hair turned gray, and his face became lined with the marks of age and weather, but to Natalie, he was as handsome as the day they met. She too showed the signs of aging, but Lucas still looked at her with the same wonder and love he had on their wedding day. They had survived hard winters and dry summers, illnesses and injuries, the constant challenges of living in the wilderness. Through it all, they had remained devoted to each other and to the life they had built. Their cabin had become a landmark of sorts, known throughout the region as a place of welcome and warmth. When Thomas was 18, he married his sweetheart, Mary, and built his own cabin about a mile from his parents' place. The young couple planned to start a trading post, combining Thomas's guiding skills with Mary's cooking to cater to travelers through the mountains. Lucas and Natalie helped them get established, proud of their son's ambition and capability. Rose, at 14, announced she wanted to go to Denver for a year to study at a dressmaker's academy. It was a bold plan for a mountain girl, but Natalie supported her daughter's dreams. They made arrangements for Rose to stay with Mrs. Patterson from Silverton, who had retired to Denver, and Lucas made the journey with his daughter to see her safely settled. Daniel, at 11, was already showing signs of being the wanderer of the family. He loved nothing more than exploring new trails and climbing to places no one had been before. Lucas worried about him sometimes, but recognized that same restless spirit that had driven Lucas himself out west after the war. Some people needed to roam before they could settle, and Daniel was one of them. On a crisp autumn evening, when the aspens were golden and the air smelled of wood smoke and pine, Lucas and Natalie sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset. They were alone for the first time in weeks, with all three children occupied elsewhere. It felt strange and also peaceful. "We did good, did we not?" Lucas said, his arm around Natalie's shoulders. "We did," Natalie agreed, leaning into his warmth. Three wonderful children, all finding their own paths. A good business. A home we built with our own hands. Yes, we did very good. "I never imagined this," Lucas said quietly. "When I built this cabin, when I came up here to hide from the world, I never imagined any of this. A wife, children, a real life. I thought I was done with all that." "I never imagined it either," Natalie said. "I was running scared with no plan beyond surviving the next day, and then I found you and everything changed." "You found me," Lucas said, "but I think maybe we were both looking for each other without knowing it. Two people who needed saving, who needed a second chance, who found each other at exactly the right moment." Natalie thought about that night 11 years ago, about knocking on Lucas's door with no idea that the man on the other side would become the center of her world. What if she had gone a different direction? What if she had missed the smoke from his chimney? What if he had turned her away? But he had not turned her away. He had given her shelter and safety, had offered his bed and slept by the door instead, had protected her when she was most vulnerable. And from that single act of kindness, an entire life had grown. "You ever regret it?" Natalie asked. "Giving up your solitude for all this chaos?" Lucas laughed, a deep, warm sound. "Not for a single moment," he said. "Solitude is easy. Loving someone, building a life with someone, raising children together, that is the hard work. But it is also the work that matters. You and our children are my life's greatest accomplishment, Natalie. Everything else is just details." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the peaks and the first stars appeared. Inside the cabin, the fire would need tending, and there would be dinner to prepare, and all the small tasks that made up a life. But for this moment, they simply sat together, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. Over the next decade, the family continued to grow and change. Thomas and Mary had 3 children of their own, making Lucas and Natalie grandparents. Their trading post became successful, a regular stop for travelers through the mountains. Rose returned from Denver after 2 years with advanced skills and new ideas, and she opened a formal dress shop in Silverton that quickly became the finest in the region. She married a banker named Jonathan Wright, and they had 2 daughters whom Rose dressed like princesses. Daniel, true to his restless nature, joined a surveying crew when he was 17 and spent several years mapping the territories. But eventually, he too came home to the mountains he loved, bringing with him a wife he had met in Wyoming and a head full of plans for starting a ranch in one of the high valleys. Lucas helped him select the land and build his first structures, proud of his youngest son's determination and vision. As Lucas and Natalie moved into their 50s, they gradually passed more of the business responsibilities to their children. Lucas still guided occasionally, but more often he spent his time maintaining the homestead and spoiling his grandchildren. Natalie still sewed, but for pleasure now rather than necessity, creating special pieces for family occasions. They took up new hobbies together. Lucas taught Natalie to fish, and they spent peaceful afternoons by the mountain streams. Natalie taught Lucas to play chess, and they had long-running games that could last for days. They read to each other in the evenings, working their way through books ordered from Denver and San Francisco. Their love, if anything, grew stronger with time. They had been through so much together, had built so much, that they were woven into each other's lives in ways that could never be undone. They finished each other's sentences, knew each other's moods, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Natalie with a trip back to Silverton, where they stayed at the same boarding house where they had spent their wedding night. Mrs. Patterson had long since passed away, but the new owners knew the story and gave them a special room with a view of the mountains. That night, lying in bed together, Natalie said, "Do you remember our wedding night?" "I remember every detail," Lucas said. "You were so beautiful and so nervous and so brave. I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive, and I was right. I still am." "I was terrified," Natalie admitted with a laugh. "I had no idea what I was doing." "Neither did I," Lucas confessed. "I just knew I loved you and wanted to make you happy." "You did," Natalie said softly. "You made me happier than I ever imagined possible. You gave me everything, Lucas. A home, a family, a life worth living. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "And you saved me right back," Lucas said. He pulled her close, and they lay together listening to the night sounds of the town below, grateful for every moment they had been given. When they were in their early 60s, Lucas began having trouble with his breathing. The high altitude, which had never bothered him before, suddenly became difficult. A doctor in Denver diagnosed a heart condition and recommended they move to a lower elevation. Lucas refused at first, unable to imagine leaving the mountains that had been his home for 40 years. But as his condition worsened, Natalie convinced him to move down to Silverton, where Rose and her family lived and where medical care was readily available. They sold the mountain cabin to a young trapper who promised to care for it properly, and moved into a comfortable house on the edge of town. The transition was hard for Lucas, who missed the wilderness and the solitude of the high country. But he found new purpose in helping Rose with her business, managing her books and handling negotiations with suppliers. And he was able to see his grandchildren more often, which brought him joy. Natalie thrived in town. After so many years of isolation, she enjoyed having neighbors and social opportunities. She joined the church ladies' auxiliary and started teaching sewing classes to young women. She and Lucas hosted regular family dinners, their home becoming the gathering place for children and grandchildren. They had 10 good years in Silverton, years filled with family and friends, and the satisfaction of seeing their children and grandchildren thrive. Lucas's health slowly declined, but he remained active and engaged until the very end. He died peacefully in his sleep at age 72 with Natalie beside him. His last words to her were, "Thank you for saying yes." The grief was overwhelming at first. Natalie had never been without Lucas since that night she knocked on his cabin door more than 30 years earlier. She had to learn how to be herself without him, had to figure out who Natalie Foster was when she was not part of Lucas and Natalie. But she was not alone. Her children rallied around her, and her grandchildren kept her busy. She continued teaching sewing and managing the household, finding comfort in routine and family. And she felt Lucas's presence everywhere, in the mountains visible from her window, in the harmonica she kept on the mantel, in every lesson he had taught, and every moment of love they had shared. Natalie lived another 8 years after Lucas passed, years she filled with family and community, and the work she loved. She was there to see her grandchildren grow up and start families of their own, making her a great-grandmother 3 times over. She was there to see Rose's dress shop expand to 2 locations, and Daniel's ranch become one of the most successful in the region, and Thomas's trading post grow into a full mercantile. On a spring morning, just after her 80th birthday, Natalie passed away quietly in her chair, a piece of embroidery in her lap. Her family gathered to mourn her and to celebrate her life, sharing stories of her courage and kindness and strength. She was buried next to Lucas in the Silverton Cemetery, on a hillside overlooking the mountains they both loved. The headstone read, "Natalie Foster, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She found home in the wilderness." Their story became family legend, passed down through generations. The tale of how Natalie came to Lucas's door in desperate need, how he offered his bed and slept by the door instead, how that single act of kindness became the foundation for a great love and a strong family. It was a story about survival and second chances, about trust and courage, about building something beautiful from the ashes of fear and loss. The cabin they built together still stood in the high mountains, maintained now by a great-grandson who had inherited Lucas's love of wilderness and Natalie's business sense. The family gathered there sometimes, in the place where it all began, and told the old stories and remembered the two people who started it all. And if you listened carefully on quiet nights, when the wind moved through the pines and the stars shone bright overhead, you could almost hear the sound of Lucas's harmonica playing those old melancholy songs, and Natalie's laughter in response, echoes of a love that had lasted beyond death, beyond time, as enduring as the mountains themselves. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in every strong woman who stood her ground and every kind man who offered shelter to someone in need. It lived on in the dress shop and the ranch and the mercantile, in businesses built on hard work and integrity. It lived on in the values they taught and the love they shared and the example they set. Natalie Edwards had come to Lucas Foster's door as a desperate fugitive with no future and no hope. But she left this world as Natalie Foster, beloved matriarch of a large and prosperous family, proof that even the darkest nights can lead to the brightest mornings, and that sometimes the person who saves you ends up being the person you were meant to love all along. The mountain where Lucas built his cabin became known locally as Foster's Peak, and the trail that led to it was maintained by the family as a reminder of their roots. Young couples sometimes hiked up there to the old cabin to begin their own love stories, drawn by the romance of the place and the powerful example of Lucas and Natalie's enduring love. In the end, their story was simple. Two wounded people found each other at exactly the right moment and built a life together through trust, respect, and love. From that foundation, everything else followed: family, prosperity, happiness, and a legacy that would endure for generations. And it all started with a knock on a door, a frightened woman begging for warmth, and a mountain man who offered his bed and slept by the door instead, protecting a stranger who would become his everything. That single choice, that moment of compassion and selflessness, changed two lives forever and created ripples that would echo through time, a testament to the transformative power of kindness and love.